And we're back. Thanks for coming back for more of the Flow Arts Institute safety training video for fire safety personnel. We've got quite a bit more information to cover. Let's get started with the next section. Let's briefly touch on the topic of the extinguishing of audience members who are on fire. The steps that you use are the same as we just talked about, but start at step 4, where they've already failed self-extinguishing. Remember, the extinguishing of an audience member requires safety personnel intervention. Don't just assume that they'll self-extinguish under any circumstances, but use the least invasive method of extinguishing, such as a fire retardant blanket. But keep in mind that their clothing is likely to be synthetic and can cause severe burns and even scarring. So regardless of the degree of their burn, please refer the audience member to professional medical care as soon as possible. Let's talk about the extinguishing of structures and venues. The extinguishing of a structural fire also requires safety personnel intervention. As with the audience member, don't expect that the fire will self-extinguish. Very small fires may be extinguished with fire retardant cloth, but anything larger requires the use of an ABC extinguisher. And really, any significant fire should be discussed with the local fire department. Let's revisit the scenarios that we discussed in the fire performer safety training section. But this time, let's look at the situations from the perspective of the fire safety personnel. And as a reminder, while some of these scenarios may seem ridiculous to you while you're watching this video, picture yourself at a performance or practice and how easily that these situations can happen. In fact, these scenarios have actually happened, and I've personally seen each one. Let's talk about the performer on fire scenario. Okay, so now you're acting as a fire safety personnel for a performer who's spinning or juggling with fire. They're mid-burn and things seem to be going well so far. You notice that their concentration is wavering a little bit as they make eyes at the object of their affection, not noticing that one of their wicks grazes their back. And now they're on fire, but haven't noticed it yet. So what now? Yelling their name and their flaming body part doesn't seem to work. Maybe it's too loud out there, or maybe they're still distracted by the object of their affection. So what now? That's right, it's time for action. You spring up with your duvetine in hand, moving towards the performer, finally getting their attention by shouting their name and their body part that's on fire. You tell them to stop spinning and hold their fire props away from their body, which they do, and you begin extinguishing the flame on their body. It doesn't look like the flame has eaten through the performer's clothing, and they still look to be in sound mind to continue spinning. The crowd applauds, and you exit the stage, going back to your fire safety personnel post. So, let's talk about the next scenario. It's the runaway prop scenario. In this one, you as the fire safety personnel are working a fire performance where the performer is trying a series of release moves with their prop. Things seem to be going well until the last one, where the prop flies out of their hand, still on fire, in a graceful arc towards the stage left, front corner of the stage. It lands, still on fire, just in front of an audience member, who just happens to be a mom holding a newborn baby. So now what do you do? With the SAVE acronym running through your head, you grab your duvetine and put yourself between the mother with child and the flaming prop. You realize that showing that she's protected is much more important than extinguishing the flaming prop, because you also know that there's another fire safety personnel right behind you who will actually handle the prop. The performer continues their choreography with one fire prop, all the while watching their errant flaming prop until the fire safety personnel extinguishes it. And at the end of it all, the mother and her child are safe, and the crowd breathes a sigh of relief, and the performer finishes their choreography. So let's talk about the Tangled prop scenario. In this scenario, you're again the fire safety personnel working at a small community show. One of the fire performers who is unfamiliar to you is freestyle spinning with his poi, showing off some behind-the-back hyperloops. They look fabulous and difficult, and he pulls off several of them before he gets tangled in the chains. with his hands behind his back. It takes a second to realize that he's in trouble, especially since his front is facing you, but you notice his wide-eyed, panicked look and struggles to free himself. So what do? While you grab your damp towel, you gather your thoughts. You realize that you'll need not only to extinguish the flame, but that the wicks and hot metal are likely sitting against his hands and wrists. So you move towards him quickly, telling him to hold the poi away from his body as best as he can. He complies, and you quickly wrap the poi heads and chains tightly with your wet towel, isolating his hands and wrists from the fire as best you can. You extinguish the fire, and then try to untangle the chains. You notice that there are already some blisters developing, but luckily, his skin is largely intact. He thanks you, and you send him off to see the medic. A job well done. So here's the hit in the head scenario. In this scenario, you're again the fire safety personnel. You're watching one of your favorite, most experienced contact staff performers spinning freestyle to a fast song with a fabulous beat. You notice that he's spinning faster than usual, but you know how good he is, so you're not worried. Until he smacks himself so hard in the head that you can hear the sound from where you're standing. He staggers and then seems to right himself. Now his body isn't on fire, but you could sense that he might be a bit dazed. So what do? When a performer is injured, it's best to check on them. So you walk up to the performer to investigate. You ask if he's okay, but he takes a few seconds to hesitantly respond. He's obviously still dazed. So you recommend that he stops spinning and takes a few minutes to gather his wits about him. You get him to follow you out of the fire performance area to your duvetine, where you extinguish his flaming contact staff and hand it back to him. It's a job well done. So here's the last scenario. It's a worst case scenario, so we'll call it the hysterical fire performer scenario. In this scenario, a drunk performer, wearing conventional synthetic clothing, dips large borrowed poi and fuels them liberally and then lights her prop. She spins for a few seconds before hitting herself in the chest with a fully fueled wick. And of course, her costume lights on fire and she starts screaming in sheer drunken terror. She then drops her poi and runs off the front of the stage, into the audience, and away from the fire safety personnel. Sounds pretty horrific, right? It is. But it gets worse. Rather than extinguish the flames, the speed of her running fans the flames, and they grow larger by the second. Luckily, the crowd is parted, preventing her from lighting anyone else on fire, but she's still running and screaming. So as the fire safety personnel, what do? As the closest fire safety personnel, you grab your duvetine and run after her. The fire safety personnel next to you grabs their CO2 extinguisher and follows you. All the while, you're shouting at her to stop so she can extinguish her flames, but she can't hear you above her own screaming and her altered mental status. There is no other choice than to tackle her with your duvetine, snuffing as much of the fire as you can, trying not to press her melting clothing against her skin, and trying to keep yourself from getting burned at the same time. Just as you get to the last of the fire out, the other fire safety personnel with the CO2 extinguisher arrives. They leave the extinguisher and call the medics. That's a job well done. Finally, let's talk about a few miscellaneous topics, namely fire performer, fire safety personnel ratios, and the minimum appropriate distance of fire performers from an audience. Now, the on-stage ratio of fire safety personnel to active fire performers is always under debate, so I won't specify guidelines here. However, be aware that there is no hard and fast optimum ratio. The ratio varies with multiple factors, including the condition of the venue, the fire safety experience of the performers, the fire safety experience of the fire safety personnel, the type of the fuel used, and the local governmental regulations. The number of feet away a fire performer should remain away from an audience member is also the topic of a heated, pun intended, academic discussion, so I'll not specify a number here either. However, like the ratio we just discussed, the safe distance between a fire performer and the audience varies on a multiplicity of factors, some of which include the fire safety experience of the fire performer and the fire safety personnel, the type of fuel being used, the type of fire performance prop being used, and the expected choreography. Well, you did it. You just finished the Flow Arts Institute safety training video for fire safety personnel. Congratulations. It's really no small feat to take in this much information, so pat yourself on the back. With the information that you've just learned, you're well equipped to significantly improve the safe practice and performance of the fire arts almost everywhere. But before you turn off this video, I think it's important that we briefly review the information that we've covered during this section. It'll help to cement the information into your brain. In the beginning of this video, we talked about the financial and legal safety of you and your group, with the most important factors being fire performer insurance and fire safety personnel registration, if required by your local jurisdiction. From that, we switched to the mental training of the fire safety personnel. We talked about ethical considerations in doing the job of the fire safety personnel, most importantly the need to remain attentive and sober while the job is being performed. We also talked about the characteristics of an effective fire safety personnel, including an emphasis on good communication, vigilance, audacity but not fearlessness, and finally, the ability to remain calm and rational, especially during periods of emergencies. We then shifted to describing the safety priorities of the fire safety personnel, including the acronyms SAVE or AVPT. Next, we focused on the physical preparation of the fire safety personnel, including the appropriate clothing and equipment, as well as the physical placement and stance, and the secondary duties of the fire safety personnel. Next, we switched to the fire abatement theory, linking the fire tetrahedron to understanding how to extinguish fires using both fire retardant cloth as well as fire extinguishers. We then tackled the topic of extinguishing humans, clothing, and even physical structures. And finally, we discussed some illustrative, urgent, and emergent scenarios of individuals on fire. Thanks again for watching our safety training video for fire safety personnel. As a reminder, if you haven't watched the other videos of our series, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of important technical and safety information in the other videos. So, thanks again, and I'm Dr. Howard Chen with the Flow Arts Institute.